Hello and welcome to the HealthBridge podcast. Today, Deborah Maragopoulos is joining me for basically what is a complete masterclass on the hypothalamus. So, Deborah is an intuitive, integrative family nurse practitioner who has spent over 30 years blending the science of medicine with the art of healing to help thousands of people heal from a variety of symptoms and thrive by treating their hypothalamus. Specializing in neuroimmune endocrinology, Deborah focuses on optimizing the function of the hypothalamus, which is the maestro of the symphony of hormones. She is the author of several books, including her latest, The Hypothalamus Handbook, which outlines the steps that people can take to start healing their hypothalamus on their own. She's known as the Hormone Queen, and she has made it her mission to help everyone balance their hormones and live optimally, no matter what their age. So I said that this is a masterclass on the hypothalamus, which really means that it's a masterclass on just how your body functions on a hormonal level, or how it should function, I should say, on a hormonal level when everything is working optimally. And so we really get into the details of what happens when the hypothalamus is thrown off and when your hormonal system, that I'll use the word symphony again, that she used, when that symphony of hormones is off or out of tune. You can imagine when, a violin or another instrument in a symphony is out of tune and it stands out and it throws the entire production off. That's what happens when our hormonal system is off, when our hypothalamus is not able to regulate our hormones correctly. It can result in major hormonal issues throughout a woman's cycle, from puberty through menopause. It can result in autoimmune conditions and so many other things. We really get into the details of all of this. If you have an autoimmune condition, I would guarantee that you probably have not heard that the hypothalamus is part of the story when it comes to healing your autoimmune symptoms. So definitely listen into this. Also, we really get into perimenopause and what the hormonal cycles look like for women, and we speak to it for men as well. If you're having any issues there at all, I highly recommend listening to this, because we do spend a good portion of time talking on the specifics of that as well, and how basically with all of these things, regulating and healing our hypothalamus function will have that trickle down effect that heals all of the other symptoms. So listen in to this amazing episode with Deborah. And like I said, get your notebooks out and take notes. All right, let's dive in. Deborah Maragopoulos, welcome to the HealthBridge podcast. I know we're going to have a super interesting conversation today, and one that might be really new to a lot of our listeners. So welcome on.
Thank you very much for having me, Holly.
Of course. So you have been working as a nurse practitioner with your own practice, I think, for number of years.
Yeah, so I started my own practice in 97, but I've been a nurse practitioner since 1987. So I've been around a while.
I love it. And you specialize in something that I would guess that probably 75% of the people out there don't even know what it does. So you work with the hypothalamus and balancing the hypothalamus. For those that haven't heard of it, or have heard of it but don't really know what the heck it is or what it does for us, can you just start right there and explain what function it is doing for our bodies?
It does. The hypothalamus has many functions. It's actually a small gland about the size of an almond in a shell that's located directly between, like where your third eye would be, between your eyebrows, right in the center of the brain. It's right above the pituitary gland. It's not protected by the blood-brain barrier, so it gets all the information coming through your bloodstream about your nutritional status, toxins, etc. It controls your neurological system, It's the master controller of the autonomic nervous system. It controls your immune system. It controls all of your endocrine system, which are your hormones, not just sex hormones, but thyroid, adrenal, pancreatic, pituitary, pineal. Controls your day-night cycles, respiration, heart rate, temperature regulation, and metabolic systems, including cellular metabolism at the mitochondrial level. There isn't much that the hypothalamus doesn't control. It's considered the master gland of homeostasis, which means balance in the body. And so its main objective is to keep you alive, to help you survive. So it's the master controller behind the screen, the Wizard of Oz, where you don't know what's happening. It's behind the screen, and we've ignored it because we can't really measure the hormones that it makes. But it's been in research now, actually, since COVID. It got very popular. I've been Googling it for 10 years. And all of a sudden, I got hit with all of this hypothalamic research because COVID hits the hypothalamus, and the majority of the long COVID symptoms we see are hypothalamic dysfunction. So the dysfunction of the hypothalamus, its inability to orchestrate all your hormones, neurotransmitters, and immune factors, is usually at the root of the majority of diseases that don't have more direct cause, like an injury or a bacterial infection.
So it does all these things, and yet we don't really know that much about it yet, as in we can't test for it to find out if we are having trouble with its function.
So we know quite a bit about it, but we know the gross anatomy and the big functions. We're just now getting into the smaller functions of what smaller meaning more the minutia of how the hypothalamus functions. For instance, we've learned a little bit more about it because of the anti-obesity drugs. There are GLP-1 receptor sites in the hypothalamus that are targeted by those anti-obesity drugs to actually help you feel satiated, decrease your hunger, increase your metabolism. That's just one of many receptor sites in the hypothalamus that controls hunger, metabolism, and satiety. It actually directly communicates with your gut and the microbiome of the good, friendly, beneficial bacteria. So it knows everything that's going on in your body. It's connected to 4 out of 5 of your senses. And that's great because it's the master controller. It's not the pituitary, that's the middle manager. But we can't directly actually measure the hypothalamus function other than looking at the outside. So it was really discovered mainly through sacrificing lab animals to say, wow, look at what this thing is doing. I mean, we start with the mice and rats, and then we look at humans and how they function. But I got into it in the late 90s because I just couldn't find the root cause of my patients' multiple neuroimmune endocrine issues. And my research led me to the hypothalamus. And my feeling was if I could just get this balanced, then I wouldn't have to give them so much, even though it was natural. I do integrative medicine, so some conventional and some more complementary therapies, but I was still giving them a lot and making them dependent on me to heal them instead of helping them heal themselves by getting to the root of their issue.
Yes.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Let's back up for just a second. You mentioned neuroimmune endocrine. What did you say? Neuroimmune endocrine.
So the neuroimmune endocrine systems, there's 3 systems that the hypothalamus is the big umbrella over. So the neurological system, that central nervous system, as well as the peripheral nervous system, specifically the autonomic nervous system. Hypothalamus controls all the amino acids that go into the brain that make up the neurotransmitters. And it controls the brain's ability to rejuvenate itself, to heal itself. It controls a lot of different things, insulin receptivity, glucose uptake in the brain. But basically, it's that master controller, kind of that gatekeeper to the brain. And then it controls the immune system, and it controls the immune system via quite a few factors. It controls bone marrow production of the white blood cells. It controls the spleen's communication to the thymus. It controls the thymus. It controls it through specific circadian hormones. It also controls it by getting messages from the gut and from the white blood cells to see what's going on in the immune system to then trigger like the adrenal glands or the thyroid or your sex hormones or your brain to actually be part of the immunity. It shouldn't be autoimmune attack, it should be other immune attack. But if the hypothalamus isn't functioning normally, it could be autoimmune. And then it controls the endocrine system. And the endocrine system are all your glands that produce hormones.
Yes. And oh gosh, literally my brain there's so many different things I want to get into here. So we can't test for hypothalamus imbalance. Is it directly? So is it implied when there is autoimmunity going on, when there are gut health issues going on? Are we just assuming, just like I assume anyone with autoimmune conditions has leaky gut? Are we assuming the same thing based on all of the things that are malfunctioning?
Yeah. So the way I function in my practice, and I have since 97, is really empirically assume and treat. As I've gotten better at this, and over time and with experience, I've basically become a medical detective, is I figured out certain symptoms, certain histories, and things I see on the blood work where I can get a pattern of what's going on with the hypothalamus, especially the hypothalamic pituitary axis to the lower endocrine glands. Then I can see if there's going to be hypothalamic dysfunction. For example, we know there's something called central hypothyroidism. Central hypothyroidism doesn't mean that your thyroid isn't producing enough hormone because there's something wrong with it. It means your hypothalamus is not telling the pituitary gland to tell the thyroid to produce enough hormones. So the issue is central. We know something called central obesity. It's in the hypothalamus that the issue is. It isn't in your gut. It isn't just in your fat cells. In fact, the hypothalamus talks to your fat cells. It knows exactly how much fat you're storing. And then there's central adrenal insufficiency, which is what Cushing's is. Cushing's is too much cortisol, but Cushing's has a central effect. Also has adrenal tumors can cause that as well. But you can also get adrenal insufficiency, like Addison's is central. That's centrally coded. It's not necessarily something's wrong with the adrenals. It's the communication from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the adrenals.
Okay.
Central amenorrhea. You don't get periods. That's called hypothalamic amenorrhea because you're underweight, you're under stress. There's nothing wrong with your ovaries. There's nothing wrong with your uterus. It's your hypothalamus not telling the ovaries to produce estrogen, progesterone, ovulate, etc.
So when somebody, say, is going in and they're not getting their periods, and the OBGYN and the doctors are saying everything looks fine, everything in there looks normal, and they're not figuring out what's going on, you're saying that it could very well be a part of that hypothalamus.
It almost always is.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because before I went into my own practice, I was working in a women's health practice. So I'm a family nurse practitioner, went to women's health for a while. And in women's health practice, you don't have periods. They don't go any farther than giving you the birth control pill. They replace your hormones. They try to give you periods. And again, I'm like, this isn't just the issue here. So, lifestyle counseling, de-stress, dietary counseling, stop exercising so darn much, whatever I needed to do to get them fixed, but still wasn't fixing the issue completely, and would still have to give them bioidentical hormones, something to support them. And then I was able to start supporting the hypothalamus nutraceutically, and I haven't had to do that work since 2003.
Okay.
So once I was giving the hypothalamus what it needed, it corrected everything. And that includes infertility related to hypothalamic dysfunction, which a lot of it is, unless you have blocked fallopian tubes. But a lot of that is hypothalamic. I have not had to do infertility work since 2003.
Let's dive into that a little bit, because, oh my gosh, how many people do I know I'm 45. How many people do I know at this point that have had difficulty getting pregnant or couldn't get pregnant, or everybody that's going through all the fertility treatments and all these things? And I'm like, this just doesn't sit right for me. It didn't feel right.
When we were doing them, when I was working in a women's health practice, and we were doing them, first of all, I thought, should we be getting these women pregnant if they're not healthy enough to be pregnant? Shouldn't we be figuring out why they can't get pregnant? Because honestly, I have impregnated a postmenopausal woman. If you give them enough hormones, I can get that uterus ready, and we can impregnate them. Okay. Should we be? Question. So I would tell the patients, once I was able to nutraceutically support their hypothalamus, said, can we just give this 3 to 6 months before we go down the road? Not that I won't look at your husband's semen analysis, because maybe he needs some help too. Not that we won't, look at some basic blood work for you just to make sure you don't have too high a prolactin, your thyroid's functioning normally. But let's just give your hypothalamus what it needs. And in 6 months, 12 at the max, you don't get pregnant, we'll go down that road. Most of them get pregnant within 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really believe that your body can heal almost anything. Okay, with the right support.
Yes. I love that message. I love that message. And why isn't that being shouted from the rooftops? Do you work with women on hormonal issues? Fertility is essentially oftentimes a hormonal imbalance.
I work with men too, as a family nurse practitioner.
I was going to ask how this, So we'll start with women. Where's the hypothalamus and the functioning of from young adulthood through menopause? Is the hypothalamus essentially what is helping shift us through those different stages of our cycle?
Yes. So that it's the hypothalamus that turns on and starts your puberty. And you start producing something called gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. That's the main hypothalamic hormone that tells the pituitary it's time to make follicle stimulating hormone and get those follicles developed in the ovaries, the eggs of the month. One of those eggs is going to be the egg of the month, and then luteinizing hormone to get that one egg of the month ovulated. It's FSH follows estrogen and luteinizing hormone follows progesterone. So they're on a seesaw together, but it's the hypothalamus that starts all that.
Okay.
But you only have so many eggs, right? You're born with about 1 million or so. By the time you reach puberty, you have about 600,000. You waste quite a few hundred every single cycle, and you have about 35 years of cycling, 13 cycles a year, and you're out of eggs. Okay. Now you add stress onto that. You add estrogens, endocrine disruptors. You're going to run out of eggs sooner. So while menopause is typically 51 and a half years, meaning that's the last period, menopause, last period. When you haven't had a period for 13 months and your FSH is over 30, you're truly menopausal. We're seeing menopause starting a lot earlier. I mean, I see perimenopausal women in their 30s. Okay, that period of perimenopause lasts for 5 to 15 years, usually more like 8-ish years or so. And that's the decline because you've run out of eggs. You're not ovulating as regularly, so you don't produce as much progesterone, and your estrogen's lowering at the same time. So this is a communication network. So I've got hypothalamus telling the pituitary to tell the ovaries what to do. And then the ovaries hormones tell the hypothalamus whether you have enough hormones or not. And then that process starts all over again in a negative feedback system. So if you're running out of eggs, you're no longer producing as much sex hormones, and the hypothalamus gets dysregulated. And it's that dysregulation that starts all the symptoms. Because remember, I told you the hypothalamus controls your temperature. Where do hot flashes come from? It's hypothalamic dysregulation. Okay. The slower metabolism, and we'll say, oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight. Hypothalamic dysregulation. We think of, for instance, osteoporosis as being, okay, you ran out of estrogen, you're going to lose bone. Yeah, that's part of it. You have increased bone turnover because you're out of estrogen. But the hypothalamus controls bone metabolism. If it's dysregulated, you're not laying down new bone. Okay. In enough, as fast as you're pulling it out, as fast as you're eating up that bone from those osteoclasts. So it's just very interesting to me that the hypothalamus has gotten written out of that picture because we only look at estrogen and progesterone. I don't even look at those numbers. I'm more concerned about FSH and LH. I want to see what the pituitary is doing because that gets me closer to what the hypothalamus is doing. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this multiple times, but yes, it does make sense. So if I'm 45, I'm definitely perimenopausal. If I want to figure out really and see where my hormones are, what I've heard is the Dutch test is the kind of ideal standard of hormone testing. Do you agree with that? Or
the Dutch test is expansive. It's an expansive hormone test. It uses saliva, so it's fairly easy. You don't have to get a blood draw. Do I use the Dutch test? Not very often. Not very often. And the reason is, and it's not that I didn't use something like that. It wasn't available when I was first starting all of this. I used all kinds of testing in the beginning to get a gist of all this. And then I figured out what basic blood tests that I need that patients could get really easily and would be covered under their insurance. so that it would actually seal in what I already knew what was happening based on their history and physical exam, et cetera. So I look at the hypothalamus through some other mechanisms that I can get via the blood, but I can tell by their body. I can be on the beach and have everybody stripped down to their bathing suits, and I can tell which one's cortisol's off, who's hypothyroid, who's got androgen issues. I can see it by what's going on in their body.
Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference. And the reach of this podcast, it takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode.
So a lot of it is vet medicine.
Right.
Instead of the chemical panels.
Totally. And what's interesting for me as I'm going through this kind of recently, what I've started realizing is that a lot of symptoms of perimenopause or signs of perimenopause are the same or very similar as autoimmune symptoms.
Yeah.
So brain fog, weight gain, pain, what else? Fatigue, achy joints, things like that. And I've been in remission from lupus for several years now, just fluctuating on the very bottom levels of things showing up. And in the last several months, I've been noticing more brain fog. I've been noticing some of the weight gain, and I've been noticing some of these things that I'm thinking, gosh, what if my autoimmune symptoms are flaring up again? But my blood work's not showing any changes at all. And I'm starting to wonder if this is actually, yeah.
So one of the ways that with my perimenopausal women, it's a little harder. And the reason that I don't use the Dutch test or measure estrogen and progesterone is that the range of normals are really wide. And what was a normal estradiol level for you throughout your normal reproductive cycle when you were healthy and young is not the same estradiol level for me or another woman. So what I'm really looking at is what your pituitary gland is saying. Is this what I'm used to? So for instance, I was an athlete when I was younger. So I actually had a little higher testosterone level, build muscle really easy, heavy bone density. So I have a lower estrogen level typically. And so if you threw me into that range, I may be off the charts and be super, super low, but I didn't have to get that low in order to be symptomatic. And I'll give you a real classic example. I have twin sisters. They're identical. They went through the change, menopause, at your age, about mid-40s. They both had their FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, done at the same time because they were going through it. And their FSH both was well over 100, so they were way into it. But the one who has more of a curvy figure, a little bustier, a little hippier, smaller waist, her estradiol level was over 100 as well, which would have been considered completely normal. But her FSH was screaming at her ovaries, saying that's not enough. So most likely she was an average of 250 to 350 in her younger years. Dutch test doesn't give me that. It just tells me that moment. But the pituitary gland said, this is not enough for me. Her twin had more an athletic figure. Her estradiol level was in the low 30s, which is considered too low. So she would have been treated with estradiol, but the other one wouldn't have if we just went with blood work. Does that make sense? And that's why I don't use those measures, because we don't know who you were when you were younger. And same with men. They come in, they feel like their testosterone's low and it's falling within supposedly normal limits, but I can tell they're low. They've lost the backside of their deltoid is flat. That's a classic sign of testosterone deficiency. So I'm like, take your shirt off. Let me see your arms. What? Yep, it's too low for you. Let's get to work. Don't you need my numbers? I can see it's too low. You lost your posterior deltoid. So so what I'm saying is that these hormones have so many effects on your physical body and your mental health and your gut health and your skin that we need to look at the whole picture and not just these numbers. And because I see a lot of people in the bioidentical hormone space, they get hooked up with a company that does hormone testing and then maybe makes pellets for them. And it doesn't work for that patient because they're all throwing them into the same bucket of normal. And like I said, the norms are really wide when it comes to hormones, and they've changed. So since I've been measuring hormones via blood, and which is all we had in the beginning, male hormone, for instance, is about has to 2/3, according to which lab you go to, of what it was 25 years ago, testosterone. So norm just means, how do you compare to everybody else? And we're getting less healthy. We're sicker than we used to be. And men are estrogenized, so they have lower androgens than they used to have. And women are hyperestrogenized. We have less progesterone and more estrogen imbalance. So this is not optimal. It's the norm. And that's not what I'm going for. I'm going for optimal health for you as an individual.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. What I get so irritated by with all of the blood tests and everything that we have to do, as long as you're within the green zone, you're good, according to.
Well, that's what they'll tell you, because they're just looking at the markers that say high or low. That's
exactly.
why I get these big old panels, and I'm looking at how they relate to one another, not just whether they're high or low. And yes, say, but this looks like it's within normal limits. I'm like, but it's too low compared to this number, which means this is happening. And so it's looking at patterns and not just one specific number.
Yeah, I'm just so glad that you explained that, because I think we get our blood tests, everything's within the green or relatively close. And so doctor says, hey, you're good, you're all clear. But if we're looking at this from a more functional perspective, there's so much more nuance within those numbers. And like you said, how one level relates to another level. They might both be in the green, but that doesn't mean that they're optimal for each other and how they work with each other
to one another.
Yeah.
And the other aspect about hormones and neurotransmitters, immune factors, have to do with something called receptor sites. So how do they get into the cells? What are the doorways that they get into? We don't have measurements of that. So I see that a lot in people with thyroid issues, where they feel like their thyroid's low. They have all the symptoms. They're constipated. They're gaining weight. They're cold all the time. They may even have down on their body. They're growing extra body hair. They're having all these symptoms, but their thyroid, their numbers like TSH, free T4, free T3 look fine. It doesn't mean it's getting into the cells. So how do we measure that? We take their basal body temperature. If it's below 97.8, first thing in the morning, as soon as they wake up, no drinking any water, nothing, and it's an oral temperature, that's too low. That means T3 activity is low. So there's other ways to measure this. You won't see too many endocrinologists measuring basal body temperatures. That infertility work, but you don't see that for hypothyroidism.
So that's working with women. You started touching on men as well with testosterone and everything. What does this look like for a man throughout their life?
It's actually very similar. Puberty for males, for young men, is instigated by the same hormone, GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, stimulates the pituitary gland to produce both FSH and LH, to stimulate the testes to produce sperm and testosterone. Okay, so it's the same mechanism, just a different set of gonads. Okay,
yeah, I got it.
Pretty much. But the difference is, although in puberty, both boys and girls going through puberty have hormones that look like a roller coaster, right? They're all over the place, which is why they're all grumpy and kind of feel kind of weird, and things are popping out that they don't like, and it's all new, and things are changing so fast. Once we both reach adulthood, if we looked at the average hormones for women and the average hormones for men, we stabilize for a while. Now, women go back into kind of that roller coaster in perimenopause. And that's because our hormones are not stable all month long. As they're cycling, you have more estrogen in the beginning of your cycle, a little less in the end of the cycle. That's when progesterone pops up. Our hormones are constantly changing. And when we lose those menstrual cycles, when we lose that natural fluctuation of the menstrual cycle, it feels very erratic in our body, in our brains. And so we start to have increased PMS. We have more pain. Progesterone and estrogen both have anti-inflammatory effects. We catch more colds. We get sick more often because they help to support the immune system. So there's all of these things that are happening where men slowly decline unless they were exposed to endocrine disruptors or they lost a testicle due to testicular cancer or an injury, they have a slower decline. So they're not as symptomatic, but they do have it. They get brain fog, they get night sweats, they get hot flashes. They don't usually complain about anything until they can't get an erection. So unfortunately, we're not hearing as much about what's going on with them, but I'm seeing it again on the beach and, with their shirts off, that they're getting these flat deltoids, which is used to happen around 50. And now I'm seeing it in late 30-year-olds. So they're already having declines in androgens.
So let's talk about why you think, what your theories are behind why you're seeing all this stuff starting in the 30s now.
Earlier.
Yeah.
Number one is stress. The more stress you're under, the more your body uses up its hormones. For women and for men as well, but this particularly affects women. Progesterone, which we produce in our luteal phase after we've ovulated, 95% of the progesterone that your adrenals need come from the ovaries. Okay. If you're under a lot of stress, your adrenals steal all of that and literally go through more progesterone. It's like you're taken out of the savings account. We're seeing stress actually playing a role in the lifespan of the ovaries themselves. They can't produce, you're just running out sooner. And we know that too. Most brides will find that even if they plan their wedding, they tend to get their period around the wedding because they're so stressed, or on their honeymoon, right? We know that stress affects our periods, and that's part of that issue. But it affects our sleep cycles. It causes hypothalamic dysfunction, which then affects our sex hormones. And then we have contaminants, pollutants, particularly endocrine disruptors in our environment, in pesticides and plastics. There's a lot of them in there. So they're blocking the ability for your hormones to function normally. And if I have my fingers in my ears, and you're going to have to scream louder and louder, eventually you're going to either stop screaming or you're going to run out of voice. Same thing happens at the hypothalamic pituitary gonad axis. The hypothalamus pituitary kind of give up on those gonads because they can't keep screaming if it's not getting the message back. And it's the endocrine disruptor blocking the messenger. So hormones are like, we're trying to get up there, but you're not listening to me. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we look at nutrition, we look at activity. The more sedentary you are, the more likelihood that you're going to have more sex hormones, adrenal hormone, thyroid hormone issues. Okay. Stress, nutrition, sleep is a huge thing. If you're keeping your lights on all the time, you're on a screen, you're actually triggering your hypothalamus that it's still daytime. And so you have shortened nocturnal hormones, and that affects your daytime cycles and all of your hormones. It affects your immune function. It affects everything. You age faster. So there's a lot of things you can do lifestyle-wise to fix it. And then you can support your hypothalamus nutraceutically to give you that extra boost.
You're totally speaking my language when you're talking about the circadian rhythm and the lifestyle changes. It's one of the things that I coach on and speak to a lot. As I have started focusing on my circadian rhythm, I have noticed a big difference in just overall energy production and just feeling better. Also, the feel-good hormones, right? I'm feeling more positive about things, but it seems just way too simple to be true. Really getting off of my phone an hour earlier at night, or really keeping the lights dim, that's really going to help me that much. Yeah, science proves that it has a huge effect, and
it does that. And the thing of it is that the people who create these devices know that it's super addictive to stay on those screens. We've known this forever. That's how thoroughbreds, I'm going into animals now. Thoroughbreds actually race better if they're born earlier in the year, right? They race against each other, 2 and 3-year-olds. So if you have a January birth versus an April birth, you've got a faster horse, right? Because it's more developed. Horses don't give birth in the winter naturally. What do the thoroughbred breeders do? They keep the lights on in the barn longer to keep them cycling all through the year so they can have that 11-month pregnancy end in January. Breeders have known this forever. We've been manipulating chickens, pigs, cows, dogs, you name it. We've been manipulating ourselves through these levels.
Yeah. And I would take that even to the plant world
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah. Shortening the growth cycle by keeping the lights on for 18-hour cycles.
Yep.
So you can produce
More produce
what
or whatever. Yeah.
exactly. Or
Yeah.
other plants. Yes.
We are basically biology,
Yeah.
and we are affected by the light.
And so the way we react with light by how we get up in the morning too, and exposing our eyes to morning sunrise
Mm-hmm.
also affects our sleep cycle.
It does.
Mhm.
So getting that early morning sun exposure affects your neurotransmitters. It makes you feel happier. Your metabolism is higher. You're going to have more energy and you'll have a better sleep cycle because you have a definite morning. And then looking at the dusk, being exposed to dusk, the pink sunset tells your body, okay, we're getting ready for nocturnal mode. And then stay off those screens so that you don't re-trigger your body thinking, oh, there was no nighttime. Now the sun rose again. Blue light coming off these screens.
Let's shift into the autoimmune
Okay.
conversation here. Can you just give us an overview of how the hypothalamus affects autoimmune conditions,
Yes.
such as lupus, such as RA, such as the 100 other possible autoimmune conditions there are these days?
So the immune system, and your audience probably knows this, but just the basics is that the white blood cells, when they come out of the bone marrow, they don't really know what to do. They need to go to boot camp, and boot camp is to go into the thymus. So those B cells become T cells, bone marrow cells become thymus cells, T cells. Once they go to the thymus and they get training. So what's going on in the thymus? The thymus is actually telling those T cells what the body has been exposed to. So it's carrying information from old infections, like we know chickenpox, we had that a long time ago, or we just were vaccinated against this. So if we see this again, this is how you go after it. So it's telling us all this different information and training those white blood cells to go after other and not self. So self-attack is autoimmunity. So poorly trained T cells are the bad guys. They're not trained properly. So who controls the training? So it's happening in the thymus, but who controls the thymus? The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces a hormone called prolactin that has a major effect on the thymus's production of the thymic hormones that actually control the boot camp of those white blood cells. And prolactin is produced for 8 hours every 24 hours. And it's produced about 3 hours after your melatonin starts and the melatonin peaks, then prolactin's produced. So if you don't go to bed with the dark and stay and go to sleep, you're going to have prolactin flux into the daytime. High daytime prolactin is one of the triggers of autoimmunity. Okay. I see it all the time. Now they don't have a prolactinemia and they don't have a prolactinoma, excuse me. They don't have a tumor. They just have dyscircadian prolactin production. So what turns prolactin off? It's not necessarily the sunshine. Sunshine turns melatonin off. It's hypothalamic dopamine. When the hypothalamus produces dopamine in response to being exposed to sunlight, that is what turns prolactin off. So if there's a high prolactin level in the morning at 8 to 9 a.m., you have a dyscircadian elevated prolactin, then I know that your hypothalamus is dysfunctional and not producing enough dopamine. So that's a simple blood test. What affects prolactin is nipple stimulation. So you want to leave your breasts and nipples alone for 24 hours before getting a prolactin test. Prolactin was caused it's called prolactin because it is the prolactation hormone, excessively high in nursing and in pregnancy. It's high in pregnancy, not because we're trying to make milk while you're pregnant. We're trying to increase your immune antibody production so that you are training your fetus how to survive in a microbe-filled world. That's what prolactin's job is. Too high of prolactin during the day will block the receptor sites for your steroid hormones. Those steroid hormones are your adrenal hormones and your sex hormones, which it does for the mom in pregnancy because she's making all these hormones for the pregnancy. We don't want to grow things on the mom like a melanoma. So prolactin's protecting her and helping her immune system actually trigger the baby's immune system and start training it. So it's a really important hormone that we don't look at unless you can't get pregnant or we think you have a pituitary tumor. I look at it on everyone because it gives me an idea of hypothalamic function. And I always see it dyscircadian in autoimmune patients.
Okay. And that's a lot to take in. And I've never heard anybody talking about that before.
I know. Every time I order it and I send it out to one of my consults providers, like, why are we getting this? You don't have headaches and milky discharge from your nipples. No, but she has autoimmunity. I want to see how dysfunctional the hypothalamus is. Because it's easily brought down. There's drugs that'll bring it down very effectively, and patients will feel so much better, so much better.
Bringing the prolactin back into regulation. Yeah. So working on that, getting up early, looking at the sunrise through your eyes outdoors.
Going to bed early enough that you have an 8-hour window of prolactin production. So going to bed before midnight.
Right. Midnight at the latest. Yeah. As when we're recording this, we're shifting into the fall just started. The cycles of the seasons are happening. Can you walk somebody through briefly what does circadian rhythm look like from summer to winter? How does that shift? Because we like things on a schedule, and the natural seasons don't care for our schedule. How do we adjust? Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that once applied will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my HealthBridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode.
Well, it's totally true. In the summertime, what's happening is the days are longer, the nights are shorter. So you can get away with a little less sleep in the summertime because your body will tolerate that fairly well. But in the wintertime, the days are shorter and the nights are longer. Your body needs more sleep. It needs to catch up. But if you do a 24/7, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, you are definitely going to crash. So if you can adjust your bedtime, your dinner time, your evening activities, your bedtime, along with the seasons, you'll be healthier. You won't get sick as often. You won't be so fatigued. Your hormones will be in better balance. Going with the sun. One of the things that I do to trigger my body is we try to eat early, but as soon as the basically fall has just happened, we just passed the equinox at this recording, so fall is just happening. We're still eating earlier, but it's getting darker early, so we're making sure that we're eating before dark. Now, eventually it'll be winter. It'll be hard to eat before dark, especially if a 9 to 5 job. So we make dinner the lightest meal, and lunch becomes the biggest meal. So even when we were working and came home in the dark and had kids that were like having to get homework, the daytime meals were the bigger meals and the nighttime meals were the lighter meals. And try to avoid the screen time. I was into not avoiding screen time before we even knew about screens when the kids were little, and doing more of the reading and things like that and other things to try to signal. Your hypothalamus can be signaled not just by the light, but by your activities. So if you normally go to bed and let's say you always take a warm bath and you do a certain routine, you have a sleep hygiene routine, that signals your hypothalamus. That starts the signaling of your hypothalamus to make the nocturnal hormones. So some kind of routine makes a big difference in the depth of your sleep and how quickly you'll fall asleep.
Mhm. And then what about cold exposure? Like you just mentioned, maybe taking a warm bath or a warm shower in the evening. I know that helps to regulate your body temperature at night and actually cool your body temperature down so you can sleep better. Cold exposure, from what I'm learning in the morning, is also effective at boosting body temperature and boosting that kind of metabolic function. Yeah.
It does. So when you expose yourself to cold, a lot of people want to wake up with a hot shower. That actually makes you sleepier. It needs to be cooler. I don't know how many people in your audience have kids, but the best way to settle them down is give them a hot bath. And that'll help them to sleep. If we want to wake up, we don't put hot water on our faces. We get the cold. That's what wakes you up. Cold exposure can be very helpful in the morning. And what it does is it again triggers the hypothalamus. It's time to wake up. Usually mornings are cooler anyhow. If you were out in nature, etc., it's cooler then. But the hypothalamus can make that dopamine and start your day, get things going, get the adrenals going, get everything moving and going.
So we've been talking about a lot of lifestyle alterations that we can start to add in to help to balance out our hypothalamus regulation. What is beyond that? Like for somebody that's really struggling with autoimmunity or hormonal issues, maybe they're really struggling with perimenopause, what other things are available? Are we talking nutrition? Are we talking pharmaceuticals? Are we talking bioidenticals? What do you work with?
So what I do is I actually developed a formula to feed the hypothalamus. So that's my foundation. It's called Genesis Gold. I also have the amino acids, which are the kind of the secret sauce in there called Sacred 7 amino acids. That formula is my foundation for all of my patients, customers, people that I consult with. Then from there, we go on to what else they might need. If they have adrenal deficiency, they may need more help. 3 to 6 months into hypothalamic support, that usually is not an issue, but in the beginning, they're still suffering. So I can't get them to exercise if I can't get their adrenals functioning normally. Or if they're going through menopause, they're just hot flashing like crazy. They may need some bioidentical hormone support. So that becomes very individualized according to what that patient is doing. But that we start with that foundational hypothalamic support to try to give their hypothalamus the nutrition it needs, the nutraceutical nutrition that it needs in order to optimize its functioning. So that we then maybe eventually can get them off everything else. And have you heard of a condition called Panhypopituitarism?
Mhm.
Pan means global, all over. Hypo means low. Pituitary, the pituitary gland. This woman came to me with panhypopituitarism, which basically means she made no pituitary hormones, which means she never started her period. She was in her early 30s, never started her period, so she was on hormone synthetics for periods. She had adrenal insufficiency. She was hypothyroid. She couldn't sleep properly, so she's taking sleep aids. She was on an antidepressant. And she also needed to take metformin because she had insulin resistance because her glucose metabolism was off. So she wanted to go on bioidenticals. Could you take me off all these synthetics and is there something natural? So I put her on all bioidenticals. But once I had the Genesis Gold available, I said, you know what? Let's see if we can feed your hypothalamus and wake things up. And 18 months into her taking the hypothalamic formula, she didn't need to take any of those hormones again. Like we got her off the extra cortisol, we got her off thyroid hormone, we got her off her sleep aids. She was no longer on taking any metformin. She was off bioidentical hormones. She had her own periods. So I said to her, now at this point, I've been working with her for years. So at this point, she's about 41. And I said, would you like to have a baby? And she said, I'm infertile. I'm like, you really aren't now. You might want to use a barrier contraceptive if you don't want to have children. And she's laughed at me. Like, I've always been told I'm infertile. I'm like, but you have your own periods. You're not infertile. She had a baby at the age of 43. Healthy baby boy.
Wow.
So I know that with time and the proper following, we didn't just cut everything off. We slowly weed down. We watch where she's going. That the hypothalamic pituitary lower body axes can heal. I've seen it. multiple times.
Mhm.
It just takes time to heal it.
Time. Who wants to take time? Isn't there a
I
magic
know.
pill for this?
Yeah, they want a magic pill, a magic shot. Like I tell my patients, it takes at least 90 days of hypothalamic support for your hypothalamus to begin that process of optimizing its function. And then you want to add a month per year you've been out of balance. In this case, she'd been out of balance since she was a kid. It took about 18 months to completely get her back into balance and optimize the hypothalamic function enough that the rest of the endocrine glands got on board. One way for your audience to think about the hypothalamus is a computer analogy that I use. And that is that your physical body is like the hardware, right? Like an actual laptop or your pad or your phone. It's the hardware. The applications, the software programs are your neuroimmune endocrine system. The operating systems is your hypothalamus. So if your operating system isn't functioning, the whole communication network within the human computer doesn't work.
But we can all relate to that, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
because most of us have some kind of mini computer in our hands.
Right, causing us a complete meltdown emotionally when that thing stops functioning
Yeah.
correctly. So that's a great analogy.
I have one other thing to add about lupus. I know you coach, a lot of your
Mhm.
clients have lupus. So one thing about hormones and lupus that we know about is that most people, once they go through the change, lupus affects women more greatly than men. We see this a lot in females. Is once they go through menopause, usually within 2 to 3 years of menopause, they get better. That there's definitely a sex hormone driven trigger to their autoimmunity.
Yeah.
So it's something to look forward to, but you still want to glide gently into menopause because as you see, your lupus numbers, your antibody numbers are probably looking pretty good, but you're feeling all these symptoms because you're going through perimenopause. Would you want to support yourself with bioidenticals? Probably not, because you'll probably trigger your antibodies. But you could support yourself, your hypothalamus, and ease yourself through the perimenopause so that's not so drastic. So your brain's functioning better, you're having less aches and pains, you're not
Mhm.
feeling so moody, things like that. Will you
Right.
have periods forever? No. You'll eventually run out of eggs, but it's more of a easy glide into it when your hypothalamus gets the support.
And so if people are interested in the support that you offer,
Mhm.
walk us through all the different levels of how you can help.
One thing that I have free is something called my hormone reboot training, which is based on my first book, Hormones in Harmony, which is the 101 to the hypothalamus. And it's a video training, and you get access to my diets and exercises and meditation, and you get discounts on the actual nutraceutical products. And then I have books. I have my newest book is the Hypothalamus Handbook, which goes into more depth on what the hypothalamus does, and I include case studies as if you're walking in and you basically meet the person. Here's their story. Here's what I'm seeing on their exam. Here's what I'm seeing on their blood work. Here's my assessment or other tests I'll do, like GI profiles, things like that. All the things I'm doing for them, why their diseases are related, how I relate what they're coming in with to hypothalamic dysfunction. They're very complicated cases. They're not just menopausal. They got lots of stuff going on. And then what my plan of action would be with them, and then what the results are. So they're real people, sometimes conglomerations of actual case studies, so I can get more diseases into the chapter. But it really helps people think through, oh my gosh, I can start to see those connections per se. And then I go through all my 5 pillars: nutrition, activity, sleep, mindset, basically how you're thinking and your belief system, as well as nutraceutical support as the pillars of hypothalamus healing. And then there's a whole section in there for your healthcare provider to follow to say, what blood work would I order and how do I interpret this stuff? And
I love that. I love
so
that.
so it's for the patient, but it's also for I've had colleagues who are like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't read anything that's guided me on clinical practice here, and at least I have this."
Yeah, because you're only one person. You need to spread the
Get this information out.
exactly, exactly.
So then my website is genesisgold.com, which is the name of the product. And there I have tons of blog posts. I have a very active YouTube channel, hundreds and hundreds of videos, and all kinds of information about kind of the major disorders that we deal with, the menopause and autoimmunity and obesity and sleep disorders. And I go into more detail on all of these different disorders and how supporting the hypothalamus would affect those disorders or not. And you'll get information about my practice, about doing consultations not as a patient, but as a client. And I have something called the Hormone Healing Circle, which is a year-long program that's kind of a group consultation where you get education in there. It's got a bunch of video education and modules and things like that. But I meet with them a couple times a month in a group, and I help them through their hormonal journeys for about a year. Some women have been in there since 2017 because it's a really effective and inexpensive way to get this direct contact with me.
Love it.
So
Awesome.
I have ways they can interact with me if they would like to do that.
Fantastic. And as we wrap up, is there any last thoughts or any last little tidbits of knowledge that you want to leave with our listeners?
I would say the biggest thing I would like you all to do tonight is turn off all the lights in wherever you sleep. And that means even like the little red lights on your digital clocks. If you can't turn them off, throw a rag or a towel over them or something. Make your room completely dark. You will sleep so much more deeply, and your hypothalamus will thank you.
Yes, I will magnify that message 100%. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much. This was such an incredible conversation. I hope all of our listeners save this one, download it, and re-listen to it a few times and reach out with any questions. Thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, my mind is still like going in a million directions with all of this information that Deborah just blessed us with. It gives me so much more information to draw on now when I am thinking about my personal health journey and how I want to move forward from here. I loved that she talked about so many of the things that I coach on as well. Her pillars of health are very similar to mine, and we both start 100% with mindset, which we didn't actually get to talk about in this episode. But we were chatting after we stopped recording, and she said mindset is really the key pillar, because if you don't have a proper mindset in place to move forward and shift things in your life and shift the way you think about things in your life and the way you interpret your experiences, then the rest of it is not going to be as beneficial as it could be, right? And that's what I say too. And that's what my personal experience has been. It wasn't until I shifted my mindset and looked at my limiting beliefs and looked at my patterns that I had in place without even thinking about it. That was when I finally started setting the stage to make major changes with my health experience. We start with mindset. We both talk about nutrition, hers with the nutraceuticals that specifically support the hypothalamus. We both talk about movement and how important movement is in your daily life. Sleep, the circadian rhythm also being a huge component. And so I just want to reiterate that it is the lifestyle changes that make the biggest difference. It truly is. And they seem, as I said in the episode, the screens at night and getting up early, they seem too simple and too small of a thing to make such a big impact in your life. But I promise you, these are the ways that we get ahead. We just have to be able to take a step back out of the societal norms that we're just all used to and that everybody around you does, to be able to see that it is those very things that are often contributing to our symptoms. So please consider that as you move forward in your journey. Please reach out to me for a free health strategy call so we can do an assessment for you and see where you're at in these different pillars and see what small steps you can take to start making changes that can have a huge impact for you. And also, please check out all of Deborah's offerings. Go to her website. She's got multiple books on there, several about hormones. And her newest book, again, is about the hypothalamus. I just signed up for her hormone reset classes So I will be in there as well so I can learn as much as I can. And those are free. That was a free sign up. So please don't miss out on that. And then check out her nutraceuticals, decide to see if those might be for you as well. And her YouTube channel is incredible. She's got so much great information on there. Also, oftentimes those videos are in nice small clips too, 10 minutes or so. And so you can learn a lot in little snippets, which I find very helpful when you're commuting or walking the dog or just cooking your dinner, little moments throughout the day where you can soak in this information without it being too overwhelming. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope that it helps you in your journey. Please leave us comments below. Give us a like and subscribe. It really helps to get our reach out there further and spread the good news that healing is possible. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the HealthBridge podcast.